The bus was already moving when the first man reached the roof. It surged forward through the narrow Budapest street, its diesel engine laboring as it pulled away from the curb, passengers swaying with the motion, unaware that anything unusual had begun. Inside, the air was thick with heat and the smell of damp coats despite the summer day. Metal handholds rattled faintly as the vehicle picked up speed. Outside, traffic compressed into tight lanes bordered by scaffolding and half-finished concrete facades, a city perpetually under repair. Above it all, crouched low against the wind, a man lay flat against the bus's curved roof, his weight distributed carefully, his breathing measured. He did not look down, he did not look ahead. He focused instead on the rhythm of motion, on timing, on the thin margin between balance and exposure. The operation had reached the phase where there would be no correction, no pause, no opportunity to rethink what had already been set in motion. Inside the bus, Sergei Mikhailovich Antonov sat 3 rows from the rear exit, his satchel positioned precisely between his feet. He had chosen the seat deliberately. It gave him visibility of the aisle, access to the door, and a partial reflection of the rear window in which he could observe movement without turning his head. His posture was relaxed, but not careless. His left hand rested loosely on his thigh. His right thumb brushed the seam of the satchel with unconscious regularity. Antonov had been riding buses across Europe for nearly a decade. He understood their noises, their stops, the way crowds ebbed and flowed. Public transportation was his camouflage, his cover, his shield. It was also, unknowingly, the stage on which his career would end. The Central Intelligence Agency had not intended to intercept a courier on the roof of a moving bus. The idea emerged not from creativity, but from constraint. Every conventional option had been examined and discarded. Arresting Antonov in a hotel would alert local security services aligned with Moscow. Detaining him at a border would trigger diplomatic intervention. Intercepting him in transit stations would expose surveillance methods and compromise sources. Movement itself became the solution. Antonov's routes had revealed a pattern not in destinations, but in transitions. He trusted the spaces between fixed points, the minutes between stops, the anonymity of motion, the psychological safety of crowds and flux. He believed, correctly, that intelligence services were designed to control locations, not trajectories. The CIA chose to exploit that belief. The story of how they arrived at that moment on the bus roof began months earlier, far from Budapest, in an office where fluorescent lights hummed and maps of Europe were pinned with colored markers representing routes no civilian would ever see. In late winter of 1976, analysts reviewing Warsaw Pact logistics noticed discrepancies in how certain Soviet documents appeared in Moscow. The material was not intercepted directly, but its downstream effects were visible: policy shifts, force redeployments, command posture adjustments that suggested fresh intelligence rather than routine reporting. Signals intelligence did not account for it. Diplomatic channels were too slow. Something was moving physically. Human couriers had long been considered inefficient, but inefficiency was sometimes the price of security. Physical transport avoided electronic interception. It required discipline, patience, and individuals capable of functioning alone under constant pressure. Antonov fit the profile. His personnel file described a man of few deviations. His career advanced steadily without distinction or scandal. He had a wife, no known extramarital relationships, and a son studying engineering. He drank rarely. He did not gamble. His psychological assessments emphasized stability and emotional containment. These traits made him invisible. The first indication that Antonov existed at all came from a review of travel manifests. An algorithm designed to identify anomalous movement flagged a Yugoslav passport that appeared repeatedly near intelligence-related events. The travel was plausible. The cover identity, a transportation consultant, aligned neatly with Antonov's behavior, but probability accumulated, and probability invited scrutiny. Surveillance began indirectly. Antonov was never followed overtly. His hotel rooms were not entered. His communications were not intercepted. Instead, the agency watched the spaces around him, noting patterns in crowd behavior, transport usage, and timing. It was slow work, methodical, and uncertain. By the time Antonov arrived in Budapest in July, the agency knew enough to take a risk. Hungary's relative openness made it ideal for observation, but dangerous for intervention. Any operation would need to be fast, ambiguous, and deniable. Budapest itself seemed complicit in the problem. Its buses were ubiquitous, its streets crowded, its infrastructure aging but resilient. Antonov blended seamlessly into the city's rhythm. He rode buses for hours without apparent purpose, transferring lines, changing directions, dissolving into crowds. It was during these rides that the agency confirmed his role. On July 14th, Antonov executed a transfer so subtle that it would have gone unnoticed without weeks of prior observation. A brief physical contact, a shift in weight, a satchel marginally heavier afterward. The kind of exchange that relied not on concealment, but on normalcy. From that moment, interception became imperative. The question was no longer whether Antonov was a courier, but how to remove him without exposing the broader intelligence architecture. The agency understood that capturing Antonov would reverberate far beyond Hungary. Moscow would investigate, adapt, and retaliate. Any exposed method would be rendered useless. The solution emerged during a review of Antonov's routines. He favored buses not only for anonymity, but for psychological control. Movement reduced anxiety. It gave him a sense of progression, of momentum. He avoided waiting areas, platforms, places where stillness invited scrutiny. If Antonov felt safest in motion, then motion would be where he was most vulnerable. The plan required precision, bordering on recklessness. A particular bus route was selected based on Antonov's habits. The vehicle model was examined. Its roof structure, weight tolerance, and maintenance access points were mapped. Traffic patterns were analyzed to identify stretches where speed would be consistent but manageable. A delivery truck was inserted into the route under legitimate cover. The timing would have to be exact. Too early, and the bus would accelerate beyond reach. Too late, and Antonov might disembark. The officers chosen for the roof insertion were selected not for aggression, but for balance. Both had backgrounds in airborne operations and urban surveillance. They trained repeatedly on stationary buses, then on moving vehicles, rehearsing every movement until it became instinct. No element of the plan relied on chance, but it relied heavily on timing. On the morning of July 18th, Antonov boarded the bus as expected. He wore a light jacket and carried the satchel. Surveillance confirmed the presence of material inside. The bus departed on schedule. As it moved into the designated stretch of roadway, traffic compressed naturally due to construction. The delivery truck merged alongside, its driver maintaining speed with practiced ease. From the outside, the maneuver appeared mundane. On the roof, the first officer crossed the gap between vehicles and secured himself to the bus. The second followed. They lay flat, minimizing profile, adjusting to the bus's motion. Wind flattened their clothing against their bodies. Inside, Antonov sensed nothing. His attention was inward, focused on routine, on maintaining composure. The bus was simply another bus, another segment of a journey that would end with him boarding a train out of the country. When the officers opened the maintenance hatch, the sound was lost in traffic noise. Their descent was rapid, controlled, final. Antonov reacted as trained. He attempted to move, to reach the satchel, to orient himself toward an exit. But training could not compensate for surprise of this magnitude. The intervention violated his mental model of risk. He had prepared for surveillance, for arrest, for confrontation at borders or checkpoints. He had not prepared for intrusion from above. He was restrained before panic could spread. Passengers recoiled, confused but not yet alarmed. The officers moved with practiced efficiency, extracting Antonov and the satchel through the hatch. The bus slowed briefly, then continued. Within moments, the roof was empty. Antonov was transferred to a secure vehicle and moved out of the city before Hungarian authorities could coordinate a response. The ambiguity of the operation worked in the agency's favor. There were no uniforms, no gunfire, no clear jurisdictional violation. By the time questions were asked, there were no answers to provide. The satchel contained intelligence of extraordinary value. Microfilm documented Soviet assessments of NATO force readiness, missile deployment adjustments, and internal disagreements within the Warsaw Pact command structure. It revealed not only capabilities, but anxieties. Antonov himself proved more valuable still. He was not interrogated aggressively. The agency understood that his identity was bound to competence and control. Breaking him required dismantling the belief that his capture was an anomaly. He was shown evidence of surveillance dating back months, of patterns identified long before Budapest. Gradually, he accepted that his professionalism had not failed him. The system around him had changed.
His cooperation followed not from fear, but from recalibration. He provided insight into courier protocols, selection criteria, and fallback procedures. He explained the logic behind physical transport in an age of electronic interception. The impact was immediate. Soviet courier operations were suspended across Europe. Routes were abandoned. Personnel were reassigned. Moscow conducted internal reviews that generated paranoia and distrust. Western intelligence services absorbed the lesson as well. The operation demonstrated that mobility could be both shield and weakness, that infrastructure designed for civilians could be repurposed with sufficient understanding. For the CIA officers involved, there was no celebration. The operation's success was quiet, absorbed into classified briefings and internal evaluations. Careers advanced subtly. Lessons were recorded, then compartmentalized. Budapest returned to normal. The bus continued its route, passengers unaware that it had briefly carried the weight of history on its roof. Antonov disappeared from public record. His family was told he had been reassigned. Within the KGB, his name became a cautionary footnote, a reminder that even the most disciplined routines could be penetrated. The Cold War moved on. But for a brief moment, on a moving bus in a crowded city, the balance of secrecy shifted, not through force or spectacle, but through patience, observation, and the understanding that in a world built for motion, stillness was no longer the safest place to hide.